We here in New York are sitting about 2 miles from a building along the East River called the United Nations. I'm wondering what, if any, role they play in these volatile situations globally, especially this one right now.
Well, it's a very good question. The problem today, I think, or it might be tomorrow, Putin is in Beijing meeting with Xi Jinping. Two members of the UN Security Council, Russia and China, that see this chaos and this tragedy as an opportunity for them, which Russia in particular is seeking to exploit in terms of the sort of who benefits. The cui bono question from what happened 10 days ago. Russia is high up on that list. So what can the UN do when China and Russia are members of the Security Council? I think it can do a lot on the humanitarian side. It can do a lot on the human rights side. But I think politically, this is going to be a paralyzed United Nations. And this is why the Biden trip to Israel is so important. We can all sit here, and pontificate on Capitol Hill. They can issue resolutions. I can write op-eds. Biden has actually got to deal with this situation, and he's doing something incredibly difficult. He's siding with Israeli justice, as he should. There has to be justice for this kind of atrocity, but he's also siding with peace. And he has to be on the side of justice in order to influence peace, and that's where the game is. And I have to say, it's not fashionable to praise presidents, but I think he's handled so far. Biden has handled this crisis almost pitch perfect handling of it.
All right, Ed Luce and Richard Haass, thank you both for your analysis and insight this morning. And coming up on Morning Joe, our next guest has experience fighting the kind of terrorist threat Israel faces in its battle against Hamas. Retired General David Petraeus commanded America's wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and he joins us straight ahead on Morning Joe.
All right, Morning Joe. This guy here, he usually has pretty good head on his shoulders. Let's listen to what he's got to say here.
Sadly, this book is perpetually relevant and never more so than right now. So you're the perfect man to have sitting here as someone who helped our country respond to a terrorist attack. How would you be going about this if you were talking to the IDF, you were talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu, if you were advising President Biden? This is a very difficult task, is it not?
It is. It's fiendishly difficult. In fact, it's hard to imagine. My great co-author, the great Baron Roberts of Belgravia, Andrew Roberts, and I sat down the other day. We can't think of a time that you saw a more difficult mission for a military organization than what they face going into Gaza. Again, if you really destroy Hamas, you have to go into every building. These are high rises, clear every floor, every room, every cellar, every tunnel, and there's a huge tunnel system. There'll be improvised explosive devices, suicide bombers, all of this. And the real issue, I think, is not just that, it's then what? And I'm sure, I am very confident, I know the IDF leadership very well, respect them highly, and I'm sure they're sitting down with the Prime Minister and now their former IDF Chief of Staff, Benny Gantz, who's joined the coalition, and asking, okay, after we clear and hold these areas, then what? And I think, so again, it's the issue that, vengeance is not enough. It's also, what are the other components of a comprehensive approach? What Richard Haass rightly was emphasizing, the need for, what are you doing the day after? What's the vision for the Palestinians in Gaza after you remove or severely damage Hamas? And I don't think you can leave them there. If they are left in charge after they pull out, they'll just come back.
Well,
So
yeah, I was going to ask you that. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the mission is to completely destroy Hamas, destroy their capability to do again what they did on October 7th, and that every member of Hamas is, quote, a dead man. Is that the right objective to begin with? And then obviously what comes next is maybe even the harder question.
What comes next is even harder, but this would be a very, very substantial task. Keep in mind that it took the Iraqi security forces, supported by the Americans and a coalition 9 months to clear a city that's roughly the size of Gaza City, Mosul in northern Iraq, where I was as a 2-star in the first year. So the challenges just of the tactical mission are very, very substantial. But the bigger issue is, what is this strategy? Again, once they have, I remember taking the 101st Airborne Division, we took the first large city during the fight to Baghdad. And I called my boss and I said, hey, good news and bad news. The good news is we own Najaf. He asked, what's the bad news? I said, we own Najaf. What do you want us to do with it? And so there needs to be, what do you want to do with Gaza City and really the entire territory? And what is the vision for the Palestinians there? Can you tell them about, you're going to focus on improving their lives, and not just there, but also in the West Bank? This has to be a moment, this is so terrible, so horrific, so barbaric, unspeakable. There has to be something good that comes out of this, and it could be in the vision for the future that really does mitigate the risks of this happening again.
And Joe, General Petraeus obviously knows of what he speaks, as he writes about in the book, having responded on behalf of the American people to 9/11, but also the pitfalls of that in terms of going into Iraq.
Right. Well, General Petraeus, it's so great to have you with us here today. I want to talk to you right now as a former CIA director and borrow on John Kennedy when he was a young senator. He, of course, wrote the famous book, Why England Slept. Based on everything that you've gathered, the information you've gathered since last Saturday morning, let me ask you the question about Israel. Why did Israel sleep?
Well, they were distracted in part. It was also a religious day, and a particularly important one. The Hamas operational security obviously increased dramatically. They presumably knew the sources and methods that Shin Bet, in particular the Internal Security Service, because this is internal Gaza and the West Bank, that they employed. And they even fed disinformation reportedly to them. And then they very creatively took out the nodes that connected the surveillance system along this very extensive fence, so that they were able to mobilize these forces and get through before the Israeli Defense Forces even knew what was going on. So a number of different factors, as always. There's usually never a single reason for something happening that is as significant as this, but obviously a colossal intelligence failure and also a colossal military readiness failure as well.
You talk about in the book about the big idea. You have to have the big idea. And then you have to communicate that big idea effectively throughout the process. You have to refine that big idea. I want to ask you, looking through that prism, which worked so effectively for you in Iraq, what is the big idea right now? If you're Netanyahu, if you're the coalition government, what's the big idea right now?
Well, getting the big ideas right is the key to strategic leadership, and we lay that out in the introduction. In fact, we went back and rewrote that to emphasize how important that is. And in this case, I think the initial big idea is, again, to seek vengeance, to destroy Hamas, again, to uproot it completely. But then beyond that, what is the rest of the big idea? As I mentioned earlier, there has to be more than just the military component. It should be a comprehensive approach that lays out all aspects of what is the future going to be for the Palestinian people in Gaza. And also, while they're at it, let's talk about the future of the Palestinian people in the West Bank as well. Very uncomfortable politically, obviously, within Israel, but let's hope that this is a kind of catalyst, again, a horrific catalyst that can prompt that thinking. And I suspect that that's among the discussion topics, perhaps the most important discussion topic between our president and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then with the Arab leaders with whom he'll meet in Amman, Jordan as well.
General, the subtitle of your book, Conflict, is The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Ukraine. Each war that we have been engaged with or on the edge of has always involved a real political component. What do we do today about the dilemma that our principal ally in the Middle East, perhaps our only ally, true ally in the Middle East, Israel, is a country that's kind of unique in that it gets attacked for defending itself?
Well, again, we've got to sit down with them, go back through how did this happen. There will be endless postmortems without question, and then identify what needs to be done in the future to mitigate the risk, but also to get at the root causes of all of this as well. Again, that's, I think, the big point that those from Washington are going to discuss in Jerusalem and then also in Amman, Jordan. It has to be more than just the military. It's often said there is no military solution to this problem. Well, actually, sometimes that's not correct. Our adversaries find a military solution to a problem. In this case, the military solution is part of the overall solution, but the question is, what are the other components of that? Again, this can't be where you get to Baghdad and, we say, again, good news and bad news. The bad news is we own Iraq. What do you want us to do with it? And we haven't thought through the post-conflict phase, the so-called phase 4 operations, which in that case were shown to be inadequate as well.
So, General, let's talk about the other war ongoing right now, one you touch upon in the book, which is in Ukraine. The conflict seems to be grinding and slow. Russians and Ukrainians fighting over at times a few meters per day. Do you see anything that changes that? Is this just going to be a slog until there's a negotiated settlement of some sort?
Well, there's a number of factors, I think, that will answer that particular question. Again, having taught economics, you always say it depends, and it does depend. It depends, I think, in particular, will the U.S. continue to support? We've done a very impressive job leading NATO and the rest of the Western world. I think we have responded in a way that exceeded what President Putin probably expected, as have the Ukrainians, by the way. So we've got to obviously get our act together in Washington, and in addition to providing authorizations and appropriations for Israel, do the same for Ukraine. Keep in mind, by the way, these reverberate around the world, and if you're found wanting here, others will seize on that in other locations. The next question is, will the Russians crack and crumble? It's very hard to say. I've been in battles where the enemy just collapsed, and you can't put your finger on what it was other than just the sheer pressure that you keep on them, and we need to enable the Ukrainians to do that. And then finally, we've got to hasten the day when Vladimir Putin finally concludes that this war is not sustainable, not just because of what we're doing to support the Ukrainians on the battlefield, but because of what we're doing with financial, economic, and personal sanctions and export controls, and then tightening those and going after those that are evading them, again, together with our Western allies and partners.
General, I want to look at your book and the lessons that you're teaching in your book, and use that up to the surge. Talk about the surge through the leadership traits of this. This is, again, Americans obviously, when you talk Iraq, focus on 2003 to 2006 for good reasons. I mean, a failed invasion, and that for the purposes of the invasion, the sectarian violence that really started to explode in 2006, the nightmare. And yet, El Anbar province, what happened with the surge 2007 to 2009, we would have Dexter Vilkins on, the great reporter then for the New York Times. He'd come in 2005, 2006, 2007, say it's a nightmare. This is just a hellscape. I've never seen anything this bad. We had him on in 2009, and he famously said, I don't even recognize the place. There is peace in so many neighborhoods that I couldn't even walk down before. There was an extraordinary turnaround. And of course, we don't focus on it that much, and we don't focus on it that much because of the hell that preceded it and because we got in the wrong way. But I want to ask you, looking at the leadership lessons from this book, what were you thinking going into the surge when nobody expected that to be successful? What leadership components of this book did you use to make the surge remarkably successful?
Well, we sought to get the big ideas right, and we did. By the way, they were 180 degrees different from what we've been doing before. People talk about change management, change leadership. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And again, we recognized we had to go back into the neighborhoods to secure the people. We had to clear and hold, not clear and hand off. We had to build. We had to reconcile with many of the bad guys that weren't the hardest of hardcore. And then we had to relentlessly pursue the irreconcilables. But it wasn't enough to get those right. We then had to communicate that, not just to our force, but to everyone else who had a stake in the outcome, and convince the Iraqis that life would be better if they supported us and then ultimately their government. Then we oversaw the implementation of the big ideas, and we would tweak them, refine them from time to time. And over the course of 18 months, our coalition forces, together with our Iraqi partners, drove violence down by nearly 90% and achieved what Dexter then described, and kept it that way for a good 3.5 years until tragically the Prime Minister undid it within 24 hours of our combat forces leaving and pursuing sectarian actions that unhinged the country once again and allowed the Islamic State Islamic State to reconstitute. So a lot of lessons in there. And again, as we look at the task before Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition government, he's got to get these big ideas right. He's got to communicate them effectively. He's got to convince the Palestinian people that life will be better without Hamas than if they support Hamas. And then obviously they have to implement those big ideas and tweak them and do it again and again and again.
See, there was a reason why the Bible talks about, Jesus said to let the wheat grow with the tares until time of harvest. It's supposed to be a harmonious atmosphere between the believers and the non-believers, or the good and the bad. And whenever the bad continues to want to try to exceed over the good, that's whenever the good basically has to show its ugly side. And that's exactly what happened in the heavenly kingdom whenever basically Jesus in the spirit world was stabbed in the back by Lucifer, that began the confrontation in heaven that turned into an all-out and out war. We're still dealing with the same dynamics today. It's just in a different form, pertaining to good versus evil, evil versus good. And until we understand that and accept that, we're only going to be like a dog chasing after its tail. We're going to be moving, but we're not going to be going nowhere. There has to be comprehension of what the heck, how come this continues to keep happening again and again and again. Well, the reason why is because evil keeps wanting to exceed or excel over good.
General, let me ask you about the country that supports, funds, does everything else for Hamas, and that's Iran. The Supreme Leader this morning put out a message saying the United States effectively is pulling the strings in all this. That's why Biden's going to Tel Aviv. They're calling the shots. And then he wanted to say the United States must be held responsible for this. We know they're also funding Hezbollah to the north. How would you be proceeding right now with Iran?
Well, I think largely doing what we are doing, which is, first of all, augment your forces very substantially. I think it's probably been a bit mistaken to constantly try to leave the Middle East. It's a little bit like Michael Corleone trying to leave the mafia. You just keep getting pulled back. And we need to recognize that. We also need to be very clear who our friends are and who our enemies are. And obviously, Iran is very much in that latter category, and be very clear on that. And then be sure that they understand what will be the response if, for example, their proxy forces, their Shia militia in Iraq, go after the forces that we still have there, or northeastern Syria, or perhaps even in the Gulf states, or against some of our partners there. We haven't always responded as firmly as we might have in the past, such as when they attacked the Abqaiq oil facility in Saudi Arabia, or some of these others. So again, I think it's a moment for clarity. It's a moment to have a lot of force on hand. 2 entire carrier task forces is an extraordinary amount. It's what we normally had when I was the commander of U.S. Central Command. It's a very reassuring presence, and it should be a very cautionary presence for those in Tehran.
And so Hezbollah, we know, has more sophisticated weapons than does Hamas.
150,000 rockets.
And if they fire those, let's say, at Tel Aviv, what next?
Well, the Israelis will take care of that. And again, I think that Hezbollah does not want to revisit what happened to them in 2006 when they made an incursion, took 2 Israeli soldiers hostage, and then just got hammered. They'll do some action. They already are. Iran will pressure them to do that. But at the end of the day, I don't think they truly want to be on the receiving end of what Israel has ready for them if they use the capacity that they actually have.
So great to have you here, General, to walk through all that's going on right now. The new book is titled Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Ukraine. Retired General David Petraeus, thank you for being here, sir.
Good to be with you, Willie. Thank you.
Mika?
All right. Joining us now, National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications at the White House, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. Thank you for coming back on. If you could explain to us what President Biden's message to the world is as he heads to Israel, but also address, if you could, the challenges ahead as Palestinian citizens might very well be in the line of fire from the Israeli response to the savage attack on Israel.
Thanks, Mika. Appreciate the opportunity to come on this morning. President's looking forward later today to heading over to Israel, and then after that to Amman, Jordan. And really, there's three things on his agenda. One is making sure that he continues to send a strong signal of support to Israel, obviously, as they continue to defend themselves. And he'll get a briefing from Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israeli officials about how things are going on the ground and where they think things are going in the future. Number two, obviously, is our hostages. And we're going to continue to talk with all our partners in the region about getting those hostages out, all of them, certainly including those Americans that we know are in that hostage population. And then three, to your exact question, the humanitarian assistance situation. We've got to make sure that aid's getting in, food, water, medicine, and that people that need to get out can get out. And Secretary Blinken had a lengthy set of discussions yesterday in Tel Aviv with Israeli officials. We made some progress here. We're hoping that that those gates will open up in the very near future, and some of that very necessary humanitarian assistance will get in. The key, though, Mika, is to make sure that it can sustain itself, that it's not just a one and done, that we can keep that humanitarian assistance flowing.
Is there a possibility of other Arab countries openly helping Palestinian citizens?
Well, we certainly would like to see everybody be welcoming to helping all those Palestinians that are now at great risk and greater risk if they can't get out of Gaza. Those are obviously conversations that we're having. Secretary Blinken had, as he did shuttle diplomacy all across the Middle East. We're certainly hoping that other folks will step up and be willing to help.
Well, good morning. Let's be specific and talk about the Rafah crossing there on the border with Egypt and Gaza and why that hasn't been opened up. Is it because Egypt does not want 1 million, perhaps, refugees flooding into their country? We know that humanitarian aid has stacked up, ready to be brought in and by the truckload into Gaza, but can't get through. Egyptians say some of the roads have been bombed on the Gaza side by Israel, making passage difficult. What's the truth here? Why isn't that border open?
There's a lot of factors that go into this, Willie. Some of it obviously is concerns that Egypt has about security and people coming across through that gate. They want to make sure that they can protect their population. So I mean that's a perfectly understandable concern. Another reason why it's not open is because of Hamas. They're literally setting up roadblocks and refusing to allow people to make any further progress on those roads heading south. So there's a lot of factors here.
So, Admiral, we heard from Hamas, and we, of course, are curious as to whether you believe them, that they might be willing to make some deals for hostages, that they'd be willing to release at least some if field conditions improve, to quote them. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means, but can you talk to us about the level of negotiation, if any, has happened with Hamas, and do we think that this is something that could be pursued?
I want to be real careful here, Jonathan, not to get too far ahead of where we are, and certainly I don't want to talk about anything publicly that could make it harder for us to get these hostages home with their families where they belong. What I can tell you is that we are very actively and energetically involved in discussions and conversations to try to affect that exact outcome, to get those hostages released and back with their families. But I want to be careful that I don't go any further than that. We obviously want to keep all our options open, and we're doing that. I do think that you got to take what Hamas says with a little bit of a grain of salt there. I mean, they should just release these hostages now. So I heard the statement, I saw it, but we're not going to put a whole lot of stock in trade in their public pronouncements when, in fact, they're releasing videos of hostages that they claim they're caring for, actually, repairing the injuries, treating the injuries that they themselves caused. It's reprehensible. They need to be released now. We're working on that very, very hard.
Retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, thank you. Keep us posted. We'll see you again soon. Thank you for coming on. Up next, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, will join the conversation. He, too, is about to depart on a trip to Israel. We'll talk to him about what he hopes to accomplish there. Morning Joe will be right back.
You pick up your phone.
His mother in their home, police say. just because they were Muslim. Hanan Shaheen survived. Her son did not. Wadia's father is in shock.
It's like a dream. I still didn't believe my son is gone.
The family's landlord, 71-year-old Joseph Zuba, is accused of first-degree murder and hate crimes and has not entered a plea.
This heinous crime did not take place in a vacuum. Over the past 10 days, Palestinians, Arabs, Muslim Americans have been subjected to a hateful, hostile campaign.
As the funeral was being held, the mosque was also on guard with heavy security because they fear their community could be targeted again.
People are afraid. I'm afraid to leave my house. I don't know if there's going to be some maniac who doesn't know any better.
The FBI says it is seeing an increase in rhetoric targeting both Muslim and Jewish people. Law enforcement has ramped up security at places of worship. Since Hamas terrorists attacked Israel, the Anti-Defamation League says there have been at least 91 anti-Semitic incidents nationwide, 7 assaults, 20 incidents of vandalism, and 64 of harassment. FBI Director Christopher Wray speaking out against hate crimes over the weekend.
The targeting of a community because of their faith is totally unacceptable.
NBC's Stephanie Gotts reporting there. Joining us now, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan, good morning again. You guys have been unequivocal in your condemnation of this horror. You can't believe it when you hear the details, when you read the details. A beautiful 6-year-old boy murdered for the crime of being Muslim. What more can you say about it this morning?
Look, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy, Willie, to see a mother and her child stabbed in their home by some lunatic because they're Muslim. We called it out immediately because we should have no place for that in society. We got reports last night in Belgium that 2 Swedish men were shot and killed by an individual who identified himself as a, quote, fighter for Allah and said it was a revenge attack. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing our world unravel because of this Hamas massacre and these 1,400 innocent people who were killed. So we're really worried. You just alluded to the numbers that we're tracking. The FBI released their hate crime data yesterday. Unsurprisingly, in the years since they've been tracking it, law enforcement, last year was the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents they've ever seen. Literally, it was a 37% increase over the prior year. And Jews, despite the fact that we're just 2% of the population, are more than half of all religiously motivated hate crimes, 10% of all hate crimes. I mean, let's just acknowledge that we are really, I think, on edge. And that's a reason why everyone is so concerned.
Jonathan, let me ask you, have you been surprised at how many otherwise thoughtful college presidents in this country seemingly cannot understand or do not know the true meaning of the word terrorist and terrorism?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Mike. It's interesting. These college presidents with their fancy PhDs get an F in recognizing evil. If you rape women, that isn't resistance, okay? If you decapitate babies, that isn't decolonization. And anyone who thinks that this was justified literally gets an F in life. But you know what, Mike? It's not just the presidents. In the last 24, 48 hours, we've had college professors from places like Cornell and Columbia and CUNY lauding the attacks, applauding the terrorists, extolling the virtues of, quote, resistance. Look, there's a reckoning that needs to happen at our universities, a moral reckoning. It's long overdue. I'm glad it's now underway.
Well, the University of Pennsylvania is losing a major donor over claims of anti-Semitism. Former U.S. Ambassador and UPenn alumnus John Huntsman announced that his family is cutting off funding to the Ivy League school. Huntsman and his family have donated tens of millions of dollars to the school over the last few decades. On Sunday, the school newspaper, the Daily Pennsylvanian, printed a letter from Huntsman to the university president, Liz McGill, announcing the end of donations from the Huntsman Foundation. The letter from Huntsman reads in part, quote, the university's silence in the face of reprehensible and historic Hamas evil against the people of Israel, when the only response should be outright condemnation, is a new low. Silence is anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is hate. On Friday, a trustee resigned from UPenn's Board of Trustees, also over concerns of anti-Semitism. Last month, UPenn faced backlash over a festival featuring Palestinian writers with a history of anti-Semitic statements. The university president released a statement on Sunday condemning the Hamas attacks and addressing the situation with the festival back in September. Jonathan Greenblatt, it might be a little too late. It seems like she's backtracking, but what do you make of the Huntsman donations, and is this perhaps the way to communicate with universities that are slow on the uptake?
I want to weigh in real quick in what you're talking about here. You know, in a way, in a big way, America is at fault of this because of what went on. I think it was during Obama's administration of the Supreme Court giving a green light to all gays and lesbians and LGBTQ community people. Whenever you have a nation that claims to be a Christian nation under the pretense of a righteous God, and then you start compromising on those principles, you're gonna put forth messages or signals to the general population that are going to be so confusing that we don't know if the girls want to become the boys or the boys will want to become the girls, to the point that now they're putting unisexes on bathrooms. Or we got children that wants to have sandboxes in the bathrooms. That way they can use the bathroom like a cat. Something internal has affected our way of thinking, especially whenever it comes to not recognizing evil as it being evil. Regardless whether you're a college professor or you're just a plain old Joe out here, the Bible is very clear in stating that you can tell a tree by the fruit that it bears. That a good tree, a good person, cannot bear forth bad fruit, or he's not supposed to, she's not supposed to, and vice versa. Whenever you are so confused that you don't know or can't recognize the differences, then you have a society that is turned upside down. Where did this come from? Where did this begin? Where's the core of origin on all this? It began right here in Northwest Tennessee. That's where it began. Of a group of people that thought that they was going to be able to undermine not only the messenger with the message, but undermine God and God's people. And it has put this great nation in peril. And in certain ways, it has put the world in peril, because now there's so many confusing images or confusing signals out there that a lot of children, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to believe. Who has done this? The adults. The adults have done this. And like I say, we as a society over here in America should stand up and give an account towards what that we have done in compromising. That, what did Jesus say about the compromiser? He said that if salt has lost its potency, what good is it other than to be thrown down on the foot of mankind and be trampled upon? Well, that's the same way with good, stern, religious, righteous religion. And whenever you start mix matching the lifestyles of people versus what they claim that they're supposed to have versus what they're doing, then you have a mixed up group of people. And I go back I go back again and again and again towards the Luciferian Lucifer that had these type of influences, that had these type of powers, that basically has influenced society or deceived society in the point of where we are right now. And it's not just in that area alone, but it's also in all the other areas, just like global warming pertaining to the oil typhoons that obviously thought that what they was doing was not going to have any type of repercussions on the planet. They kept telling everybody, oh no, that's y'all's imaginations. Oh no, global warming ain't real. Oh no, Al Gore, he's just a owl lover. He's just a tree hugger. He's just a this or a that. You had several people 20 plus years ago that was screaming and hollering, we're in trouble, we're in trouble, we're in trouble, and nobody wanted to listen to that. You know why? Because it wasn't popular. Just like during World War I, leading up after World War I, even through the Vietnam War, cigarette smoking, the Surgeon General knew caused cancer. But because it was not a popular thing to say, they didn't say it. So what is the leading influence in these decisions? You got to go back to the core of origin. The love of money is the root of all evil. And whenever you have a society that is no longer functioning under the basic principles of the true, righteous, holy, eternal God, the God that made all the commandments, that hadn't changed none of them as far as I know to this day. The 10 Commandments are still just as firm as being the 10 Commandments today as they was over 4,000 years ago whenever God first delegated it over to Moses. Whenever you have a society that calls black white and white black, whenever you have a society that calls good evil and evil good, whenever you have a society that is so confused that they don't know the difference between daylight and dark, you have a confused, mixed up world. And that is where we are today. And basically, whenever they talk about anti-Semitism, and you probably, whoever keeps up with my messages, has heard me say this again and again and again. Whenever I come back here in 2014, literally all hell busted loose in my life. But the sad thing about it wasn't just my life, it was now our life, because I was living here with my younger brother on the same property, and he was getting the same type of persecution that I had become accustomed to. I had become callous to in certain ways. Has it hurt? Yes. Have they left scars? Absolutely. Have I been violated and victimized? 100%. 100%. And it wasn't that Juby was challenging the system. It was the system that was challenging Juby.
You know, the
church world has let the windmill ministries down because the church world in this community, going back to the core of origin, did not want to support the things that the founder of the windmill ministries was preaching and teaching going back 30 plus years ago whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the general public. Now, you wonder how come things is topsy-turvy? You wonder how come things is upside down? You do the figuring for yourself.
Israeli Arabs were murdered. People from Germany, the UK, Thailand, the Philippines, and of course America, Mika. Dozens and dozens of Americans were killed. Reportedly, upwards of 20 Americans are being kidnapped, bound and gagged, and held in tunnels below Gaza. Like, again, to your point, let's acknowledge that these presidents may finally be realizing that the university is just not students sitting in desks. A university is a community. Donors are a part of it. Alumni are a part of it. You know, there are other stakeholders who are part of it, and they need to be listening to all of them to create a really...
The business sector is part of that.
A community where Jewish life isn't valued.
The hospital is part of that. The churches is part of that.
Evil? That isn't leadership, Mika. That's something far, far less.
So, Jonathan, President Biden heads to Israel this evening. You yourself are about to make your own trip there. Tell us what you hope to hear from him, but also what you'll be doing.
Yeah, so I'm here in D.C. today. American Jewish leaders from around the country are all convening together with leaders of the administration, the leadership in Congress, for a sort of rally, if you will, to show our ironclad, unwavering support of the state of Israel and the Israeli people. And then about 50 of us are taking an emergency solidarity mission to Israel. We're doing that, in parallel to and probably converge with the president. And I think, again, the fact that he's going is a sign, Jonathan, about the value and importance that America places on the American-Israeli relationship. When we're there, we'll be meeting with not just the political leadership of Israel, the American families of victims, American families of hostages who are there, leadership of the IDF, and really trying to understand how a hate group, how a terror organization like Hamas could cause such carnage, and how hopefully Israel, the situation in Gaza is very, very bad. My heart breaks for the innocent Palestinians, like my heart breaks for all of the Israeli families who lost loved ones, who've been displaced and dislocated. Let's hope that America and Israel together can figure out how to eradicate the evil of Hamas once and for all.
CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, thank you very much for being on. We'll be watching your trip. And up next, NBC's Richard Engel reports for us live from the Israel-Gaza border. Also ahead, we'll go through Donald Trump's latest gag order and get expert analysis from former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg. Meanwhile,
this is another thing that I feel like that has been misleading to a lot of church members, a lot of people that has faith in God, is the fact that a lot of them say that they believe in good and bad, but they actually look at things through a smoked lens or whatever you want to call it, and they look at these subject matters as them being basically metaphors. And as I have said before, and I continue to keep saying, Jesus Christ never looked upon his enemy as it being some sort of a joking or a charismatic problem to the degree that if we look at him towards him being an adversary, that's okay, and if we don't, that's okay too. No, that's not the way Jesus Christ looked at the devil, Lucifer, the one that started the hullabaloo up in heaven to begin with. And now the same devil, the same spirit, evil spirit, is now doing the same thing down here, creating hullabaloos, creating anarchy, creating evil, and it's causing humanity to basically turn against one another. And until we're smart enough to figure that out, my friends, we are going to continue to be like the dog chasing after its tail. He's getting exercise, he's moving, but he's just going around and around in circles. He ain't going nowhere. And until the spiritual world, the preachers, the ministers, the people that stand in behind the cloth, until they're willing to acknowledge this, we are going to continue to keep making the same mistakes again and again and again and again and again. Lessons will be learned until, yeah. It's really sad because we're in the 21st century, and this is like 6,000 years later, and we're still debating what is good, what is evil. And now we've gotten so confused, we're debating on whether or not girls can become boys or boys can become girls. That way they can take, boys can take showers with the girls in the PE classes or whatever. It's out of hand. It is totally out of hand, and it begins with the soul. It begins with the heart.
That Israel has the right and indeed the duty to defend its people from Hamas and other terrorists and to prevent future attacks. The president will hear from Israel.
See, why should we even be debating that pertaining to a Christian stance? Just because you're a Christian, does that mean you're supposed to be whored out? Just because you're a Christian, does that mean you're supposed to be somebody's whipping post? That's exactly what my brother and I become out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. We had been attacked again and again and again by various people in the community to the degree that even the courts couldn't handle the situation. And why wouldn't we have thought that the courts was in behind this, especially if they couldn't stop it? And the only way that they stopped it was to attack me. And now I get victimized again by coming back to Northwest Tennessee, and I had no idea that this big hullabaloo was going to break loose in my life just because I come back here. But it actually costed me the life of my youngest sibling, my brother. It costed me my only living remaining brother. And you wonder how come I'm upset. You wonder how come I'm so passionate about what I'm talking about. Well, if you had a community uprising and it costed you one of your siblings or somebody that you cared about, I think you would have the same type of feelings that I would have towards trying to figure out what happened, why it happened, and let's not allow for this to ever happen again pertaining to anti-Semitism. And it has been on the rise. And I didn't realize that I was going to walk into a beehive until after I'd done already walked into the beehive. That was in the year 2014, which was 9 years ago. Thank God I'm still alive, and thank God I can tell my story accurately and do it with authentic proof, because I've got video of these people that was doing what they was doing, and they know it. We went to court again and again and again and couldn't get nothing done. Called the sheriff's office during Mike Wilson's administration again and again and again, sometimes 2 and 3 times a month, because of the outlandish behavior that was happening down here. And it was all coming to us. We was not going to it. You know, there's an old saying that if you're looking for trouble, it'll find you. We wasn't looking for trouble. We wasn't out here promoting any of our ideals or going to the people's houses and dropping off literature or doing any of the above. They was coming out here. We was being hunted. We was being terrorized and tormented. And the courts knew it in Weakley County, Dresden, Tennessee.
Lisa saying how much they support the Palestinian causes.
Exactly.
Why don't you actually support the Palestinians?
Right.
Why is it that you won't bring some Palestinians in as refugees temporarily? We assure them their right to return, but take care of it. The ugly secret, unfortunately, throughout the Arab world is that
where in the Arab Bible, where in the Quran does it say that it's okay to kill somebody if you can't convert that person over to your ideology? Where is it in there? I would like to know, because I'd like to read it, because if it's in there, it is absolutely the work of the devil. Jesus talked the opposite towards if they won't receive you, if they won't accept you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. He didn't say to get a butcher knife out. He didn't say to try to cut their heads off. He didn't say to get a gun and try to shoot them if they won't convert. He just said, shake the dust off your feet and move on. Well, that's what I've been doing now for 30 plus years, and we've seen what's happened to America. We've seen what's happened to Northwest Tennessee. We've seen what's happened to now the world in the past 30 plus years since people has openly rejected and prosecuted the messenger because they did not like the message.
Used, really.
Being used in these Arab countries, these Sunni Arab countries, again, who are making peace with Israel,
right,
but never made peace with the Palestinians as part of that process, Mika. The incredible thing is, they won't help. And so here we have Tony Blinken running around all the Middle East, asking Arab countries to help us help the Palestinians, and they're refusing. For some reason, nobody ever tells that story. It needs to be told.
And the president, of course, is headed back. We're going to get to the fight for the speaker. Who's going to be the Speaker of the House? Because we don't have one. And Trump got a gag order. We'll get to that, but let's stay on this, Willie.
Yeah, let's go right to the border, Israel and Gaza. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is there for us again this morning. Richard, if you could just pick up on that point that Joe was just making about the efforts by Secretary Blinken scrambling across 7 or 8 different Middle Eastern countries to try to get them on board with the humanitarian crisis, with doing something to aid the people of Gaza. Where does that stand right now, and how likely, in your long experience in the Middle East, is it that Middle Eastern countries would help in that effort?
Good morning. So many diplomatic efforts underway right now. First of all, on that potential safe zone in Gaza, diplomatic efforts are underway. U.S. officials say they are working on it. They haven't discussed any specifics because they're trying to figure out how that aid would get in, where it would go, how it would be distributed, who would be responsible, and how to make sure that it doesn't end up in the hands of Hamas and not getting to the Palestinian people. Do I think it will happen? It is very possible that it will happen. There is a lot of pressure on Hamas, a lot of pressure on Israel to allow some aid to get in there. Many Arab states have been accusing Israel of carrying out a policy of collective punishment by sealing off the entire Gaza Strip and not allowing in electricity, food, medicine, and other supplies. So that is only one part of the diplomatic push that President Biden will also now be engaged in personally when he comes to this country tomorrow. The other is this ongoing effort to free the hostages. And there was a development yesterday. It came from Hamas. It is still tentative, but it is potentially a game changer in that the main spokesman for the military wing of Hamas gave a statement through Hamas's regular verified channels in Arabic saying that Hamas has 200 hostages. The group said that other Palestinian factions inside Gaza have around 50 or more than 50 other hostages, so bringing the total number of hostages inside the Gaza Strip to 250 plus. But Hamas says of the 200 that its military wing is holding, it has verified their identities and says it is holding an unspecified number of foreign nationals and that it is willing to let them go. It is willing to let them go because it says they were taken during its raids into Israel when it went on a killing and kidnapping spree, didn't check their identities at the time, but that the foreigners are not part of its conflict with Israel, that it has no issue with them, and that it will let them go when, quote, field conditions are right. Now, what exactly that means is unclear, but Iran, which backs Hamas, has said that Hamas is willing to let hostages go if Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip continue. So that is another potential development. There's work on getting humanitarian aid in, and then of course there is the looming military action. The Israeli airstrikes into Gaza are still continuing, although I will say that over the last 24 hours or so, they do seem to have slowed down. There are still airstrikes, but they are not quite as ferocious as we saw over the first few days of this conflict.
Richard, since October 7th, obviously, our impression, the world's impression of Israel is this fearsome fighting military machine has been severely damaged, its reputation damaged. I'm curious, we're hearing about the hundreds of thousands of fighters that are coming in now, the reservists that are coming back in. Do you get a sense that Israel is once again feeling confident that their defense, their military can actually defend the people, or are they still shattered by the events of October 7th, and are they still questioning whether Benjamin Netanyahu and this coalition government can do the job?
All of those things are true. The Israelis right now are angry, but they are also nervous. They are nervous that how they could have missed this. They are nervous what Hamas may have in store in Gaza. But they say, and if you ask Israelis, they will say, yes, we were caught sleeping. We made a mistake. There is anger directed at the Netanyahu government and at Netanyahu personally. But Israelis are saying now they've mobilized. They're not sleeping anymore, and they are on a mission as a nation to destroy Hamas. That is the collective goal here, and I think everyone feels that it is something that is necessary. The question is, how do you do that? Do you send the 300 plus thousand reservists into Gaza in some sort of blitzkrieg? Do you carry it out through targeted raids, potentially in coordination with the United States and other countries? Do you do a combination of the two? Do you send in some troops to block off off parts of the Gaza Strip while raids continue and negotiations continue. It is an enormously delicate time, and that's just in the Gaza Strip. And this conflict has now already spread beyond Gaza. It's important to think about this as what's described as the axis of resistance here, and that is Iran and its proxies. And its proxies are Hamas and Hezbollah. And Hamas is clearly mobilized. Hezbollah is mobilizing, and there have been strikes carried out by Hezbollah against Israeli troops along the border. Israel has evacuated some border communities. And then Iran has issued vague threats just in the last 24 hours that it might carry out preemptive strikes if Israel's attack on Gaza continues. So there are many signs that there could be some diplomatic progress with the potential opening of a safe corridor or a safe zone, some movement. The first time ever we're hearing any kind of movement regarding the hostages. But the new threats from Iran and Hezbollah all do not bode well.
NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, thank you very much for your reporting on the scene. Joining us now, NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons and White House Bureau Chief at Politico Jonathan Lemire, the host of Way Too Early.
Keir, let's start with you. Headline of the Wall Street Journal, top of the page, war shifts global dynamics. You suddenly see a connection between Hamas. You can draw a straight line to Iran. From Iran, you can draw a straight line to Russia. From Russia, you can draw a straight line to China. Not saying they were all coordinated in this, just simply saying, this Wall Street Journal article states that this is actually a big win for Russia. The fact that the United States is going to be drawn in is something that Russia's celebrating right now.
Well, Joe, let's describe it in a different way. We live in a different world than, for example, when the US invaded Iraq all those years ago. And you can dismiss the United Nations, but it does give us a window into the way the world looks right now. The UN Security Council met last night. There was a Russian draft which strongly condemned all violence and hostilities directed against civilians and all acts of terrorism. That draft never mentioned Hamas. Linda Thomas-Greenfield saying at that same meeting, that same session, by failing to condemn Hamas, Russia is giving cover to a terrorist group that brutalizes innocent civilians. It's outrageous, hypocritical, and indefensible. That being said, Joe, I'm told by a European diplomat that the US didn't like a Brazilian resolution that called for humanitarian pauses, that firmly condemned all violence and hostilities against civilians, but also unequivocally reject and condemned the heinous terrorist acts by Hamas. I was told for the US that was just too much equivalence. I think it's notable, for example, that last night the votes for that Russian resolution, which didn't pass, included the United Arab Emirates. So if you just take the Arab world, for example, polls, very strong, deep polling, suggests that actually the Arab streets' view of Israel hasn't moved by more than a few percentage points since the Abraham Accords apparently improved relations. We're seeing Russia and China, as you mentioned, in lockstep. President Putin meeting with President Xi in China tomorrow. I thought one phrase from the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi after speaking with the Secretary of State over the weekend was fascinating. He said there is no way out through military means, and using violence for violence will only create a vicious cycle. So you're right. I mean, clearly, America needs as many allies for this as possible. So does Israel. And clearly, America's foes will enjoy any way in which the US gets pulled into a quagmire or is seen to make a mistake in particular.
But if you let evil dominate good, especially the way that I'm just going back to my particular situation here in Northwest Tennessee in Weakley County, the more that they done, that they got away with, the more that they felt like that they could do and get away with. It was festering. It was growing. It was evolving. And the courts up here in Dresden, Tennessee, either couldn't see it or could see it and was supporting it, or they was incapable of understanding what the hell was going on down here. Because it wasn't just one individual It was a whole group of people that was coming up against the Windmill Ministries missions simply because I had moved back here. And my younger brother wound up in the middle of all that. And that's the reason why I say, as far as I'm concerned, he was collateral damage. Because this is a spiritual war. It has been a spiritual war. And it will remain a spiritual war until God himself comes back and casts evil into hell, where we will no longer have to be tempted or influenced by any more of these evil doinsers or whatever you want to call it, bad people. It's growing. Evil is growing, and the Bible says that in the last days it will intensify, and the reason why is because it knows that it has lost in this competition, and it is wreaking havoc on any and everything that it can, because it has lost. And it knows that it has lost. But until the Christian society is willing to come together to conform and pull together as a unit, we're going to continue to be gnawed on, pawed on. We're going to continue just like Israel over there right now in being bombarded again and again and again. So we have to quit looking at the outside and start looking at the fundamental inside if we're going to defeat and eradicate evil, the same as even Dick Cheney said, in eradicating the axis of evil. That was the whole purpose for the Windmill Ministries ever being anointed by God and coming out into the eyes of the people to begin with.
Our viewers, our friends at home that are watching, to understand right now how the world's split. Of course, we've got the West, especially with the Poland win by Donald Tusk's coalition. You've got a unified West, a unified Europe, a unified America, whether you're talking about Israel right now or whether you're talking about Ukraine. But you talked about the global South, and we can go from Colombia to the UAE to India, countries that are more non-aligned right now. Yeah. It's interesting. Joe Biden has been able to consolidate NATO and consolidate everything, but it's interesting. The very things you're saying about Israel, you could say about Ukraine. Talk about that continued battle for the hearts and the minds of the global South.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's clearly an issue. I mean, be in no doubt that China and Russia see that as a principal objective, to win over the global South as far as possible, because they consider that collective vote, if you like, to be an important one. And then I would just say one thing, Joe. Europeans may not be as united as we necessarily think. I mean, if you just look at the past more than a week, they've struggled. They suspended aid to Gaza, then they reversed it. I'm told that there was actually fury when Ursula von der Leyen went to Israel on Friday and failed, in the view of some, to combine support for Israel with explicit calls for restraint. It was only on Sunday night that all the 27 countries of Europe united in a statement to say we strongly emphasize Israel's right to defend itself in line with humanitarian and international law, but also reiterate the importance of ensuring the protection of civilians. So just think about the Europeans who are worrying. One European diplomat said to me they're worrying about their local situation. We just saw that alleged terror attack overnight in Brussels. They're worried about their situation. One European diplomat said to me, we don't want to import this crisis. So there's a lot of nervousness in a lot of places about how this plays out. And if you talk about the Arab world, it is understandable that Arab leaders will have front of mind the view of the Arab street, because that hasn't gone away despite the Abraham Accords. And then in terms of the global South, the message that China and Russia consistently try to send, and you may think it's laughable, they try to send the message that we're the underdogs, just like you, we're on your side. And that, I think, is the danger, is that if that takes hold, that idea that the Palestinians are the underdogs, this starts to turn the long way. I think that's part of the reason why you have President Biden so concerned about the idea of an Israeli occupation of Gaza.
Coming up, Senator Chris Coons is standing by. He serves on the Foreign Relations Committee and will weigh in on what is unfolding in the Middle East right now. When Morning Joe comes right back.
New truck?
Really, really
Swanson
sad.
Delivery has a new name.
Because of humanity being so deceived by this wicked, demonic, satanic figure that's over in Saudi Arabia, that's sitting back just eating all this up, just like Russia is eating all this up, boasting and basically bragging on themselves because they know that they are an evil entity, and they know that these governments support evil more so than they support righteousness. But what I'm saying is this, is I'm pretty sure that Jerusalem was doing stuff over there that did not line up with the ways of the righteousness God. And because of it, they have been judged and condemned, just like America. And I know that with me being an American, I'm not supposed to say nothing about my own people, but I got news for you. If I see wrong, if I see evil, I'm going to be just like my grandpa, and I'm going to be a straight shooter, and I'm going to call black, black, and white, white. I ain't going to call it gray. I'm going to call it either right or wrong. And that's what has basically went in and, I don't know if the right word would be conformed or deceived a lot of your spiritual leaders to the degree that, oh, it's just a little sin, it ain't gonna hurt, it's just a little bit of bad, it ain't gonna hurt. Really? It's a small fox that weaves in and out of the grapevines that winds up spoiling the whole vineyard. Wasn't the big ones that you had to worry about, it was all the little ones. Because if you get enough of them, they'll kill the vineyard. You won't no longer have a vineyard.
Greater, far more organized. Hezbollah is Lebanon's most powerful armed group and is committed to Israel's destruction.
You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart.
He's a fool. Only a fool would make those kind of comments. Only a fool would give comments that could give aid and comfort to Israel's adversary. This is someone who cares not about the American people, not about the people of Israel, but he cares about one person and one person only, the person he sees in the mirror when he wakes up in the morning. We cannot, once again, nominate a fool like this and get him anywhere near the presidency of the United States. And having a fool like Donald Trump, who would make those comments in the tone that he made them, is proven to folks that he has no business being president of the United States.
You know, Mike Barnacle, earlier this week you talked about how we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of the commemoration, actually a very sad date of over 200 Americans being blown up and killed by Hezbollah. Hezbollah continues their reign of terror, their targeting of our allies, their targeting of Americans. And here you have Donald Trump saying they're very smart, very, very smart people. Just like he said it about President Xi, just like he said it about Kim Jong-un, just like he said, and he admitted that he got along better with authoritarians. Chris Christie saying what a lot of Republican voters are thinking. It's about time that you have Republican candidates that are coming out and actually calling Donald Trump what he is.
Yeah, and Joe, that anniversary, by the way, is October 23rd. It is coming up. The Marine Corps barracks in Beirut blown up by Hezbollah. Very smart people, Hezbollah, according to the former president. The interesting thing about that is the root of why he says all of these things. And Jonathan just alluded to it a couple of minutes ago. It's always about someone saying something positive about Joe Biden, something positive about how Biden did something with Netanyahu, about how Biden did something positive for Israel and the people in...
I'm going to weigh in on what you're talking about here. It could have been that Donald Trump was indicating that these people was very, very wicked or crafty or there's other words that I can't even think of right now, that he used the wrong word to characterize those people. Just like Donald Trump basically called Putin a genius, there's really no way that you can wiggle and wave out of that one, because you're calling somebody that's out here killing innocent men, women, and children and blowing up hospitals and maternity wards and etc. You're calling that person a genius? So I agree that Donald Trump does not need to be the next president of the United States. But I also agree that neither does Joe Biden, because of his age and because they are so old, they do not know what the people actually needs here in America with their needs, and the times have changed to the degree that they're way behind. They're like 5 administrations behind. What done this to us? The ordeal that happened during Reagan's administration. It was God that helped protect Reagan in a bullet coming into his body and it not killing him. It was God that helped Reagan in convincing the superpowers of ending of the Russian Cold War and the falling of the Berlin Wall. It was the messenger that was helping to bring forth that message of God that they wanted to eradicate. They wanted to eliminate. They wanted to do away with the messenger because they didn't like the message. Well, I got news for you. I don't care if you like it or you don't like it. It's already been written and chiseled in stone towards the day, the hour, the month, and the year of when all this is going to take place. We are only in the world that has been created for us, not with us. The world does not evolve around Donald J. Trump, just like the world does not evolve around Dennis James Juby Jackson. The world does not evolve around the Russian parliament pertaining to their communism. Or the world don't evolve around this group of people that attacked Israel over there. The world evolves around a righteous, holy, eternal God. The same God that made the commandments, that the commandments of this day hadn't been changed. Why is that so confusing for people? You call evil, evil. You call good, good. You quit going into these gray areas that has basically caused the lukewarmness that even the Bible talks about in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, that God hates, that he'd rather you either be cold or hot, that if you're lukewarm, he'll spew thee out of thy mouth. Now, he hates that. He hates the lukewarm people because of their gray area of trying to balance things out that way. He hates that. Just like he hates the deeds of the Nicolaitans, just like he hates those that profess to be Jews and are not. God has hate in his character because of evil. I don't even think hate existed until Lucifer done what Lucifer done up in heaven, and then God had to show his bad side. He had no other choice. He was forced into showing his bad side. It's we, the people, that can't understand that. We, the people, can't decipher the difference whenever it says to rightly divide the scriptures of whether or not it's talking about the spiritual man or the fleshly man. And in some cases, it may be talking about both at the same time. But as long as we continue to keep corrupting God's word and corrupting the interpretation of God's word, we're going to continue to keep living in that gray, lukewarm state that God said he hated, that he would spew out of thy mouth. So you can't tell me that even a person that has at one time had a relationship with God cannot eventually wiggle and worm over into the middle area, the lukewarm area, because if it wasn't possible, it never would have been in the Bible to begin with of God hating those areas. Now, he would prefer for everybody to be on the warm side, to be on the hot side. But he knows that ain't going to happen. God knows that everybody isn't going to be saved. That's the reason why Jesus said that he cometh not for those that needed not a physician, but for those that did. He wasn't saying that on account of people being righteous down here. He was saying that on account of people already being doomed. Their soul was already doomed. They're going to hell, and they know they're going to hell. It's the people that want to proclaim a religious status that are living just as dark and just as deep as the devil himself. That's the lukewarmness. That's the part that God hates. He said that he would spew thee out of thy mouth, and that's exactly what he's doing right now towards seeing all these different institutions crumble, and all these people that are basically either getting sick or something's happening to them, and they're basically being eliminated from the planet. And it used an example of that pertaining to a tree, that if the tree is putting forth good fruit, God will allow for that tree to grow. But now, if the tree is no longer producing fruit, guess what God's going to do with the tree? Using the tree as an example of mankind, he's going to hew the tree down. That's what it says. That he'll either do it himself, or he will allow for the Luciferian Lucifer to do it. And that's what I have more of a tendency of believing, that now the powers of Lucifer has been increased, and basically God's looked at the devil and said, do your job. Sick them. They want to play games with me. They don't want to worship me. They don't want to honor me the way that they should. They want to be deceitful in their walk with me. And God says, sick them, Lucifer, do your job. And that's why we're seeing havoc fall upon humanity the way that it is. And that's the reason why the Bible has already done warned us, already done told us again and again and again, that whenever we shall see these things starting to occur, woe be unto the inhabitants. Woe be unto the inhabitants. It talks about the woes in the Bible. Woe, woe, woe. In other words, there's going to be certain things that's going to happen to the planet that's going to be on a big level. A global big level. And that's what we're seeing right now. And, 9/11 was only a fraction of that has put us where we are right now. And the fact of the matter is, we are dealing with a supernatural entity. And that same entity is the very entity that blinded the people over there pertaining to the Iron Dome, that basically caused them not to be aware of what was happening. Same thing happened to us in 9/11. Same thing happened to us pertaining to Pearl Harbor. We're dealing with a supernatural evil entity. And if we don't recognize that, and if we don't deal with things appropriately on that level, we're only going to get our tails whipped again and again and again. We will be ravaged again and again and again. In other words, lessons will be repeated until learned again and again and again.
Israel loved President Biden, and it develops a tick in Donald Trump that he reverts to always himself, not the policy, not the dangers inherent in what's going on in Israel and in the Middle East right now, always about himself. I mean, it's a disease that he carries.
Coming up, a live report from Israel, where President Biden will arrive tomorrow on a high-stakes visit. A preview of that trip straight ahead on Morning Joe.
You keep dog food in the fridge? It's not dog food, it's fresh pet.
To be quite honest with you, I'm really surprised that God continues to keep dealing with humanity. I'm surprised that God hadn't thrown up his hands and done just exactly what he done during the days of Noah, and say, you know what? They're doomed. I can't do nothing with them. I can't conform them. I can't work with them. I can't open their eyes. This demonic spirit has basically cast a curse upon these people. And because of it, I'm just gonna dissipate the whole thing. I'm gonna eradicate the whole thing. I'm really surprised that God hadn't done that. And the only reason why that I believe that he hadn't done that is because of the Lord Jesus Christ, that continues to sit at the right hand of the Father, that maketh intercession prayer for you and I, towards being an advocate for us, in pleading to the Father, please don't kill them yet. Please don't do that yet. Please don't come down on them the way that you did during the group of people during Noah. Please, please, please. In other words, Jesus Christ is pleading in our defense that there's hope for them. There's hope for them. There's hope for them. But man, has that hope ever become bleak in the past 30 plus years, the way that the Western world over here either denied or basically attacked one of their own. And the church communities, not just in this area, but in America in general, especially the corporate church areas, they should be ashamed that they allowed for this to ever get in this type of situation. And I ain't necessarily talking about I right now. I'm talking about we, the whole Christian family, of what we're having to deal with and what we're having to see and experience and go through that the corporate churches here in America should be ashamed that they have allowed for this to get out of hand the way that they have allowed for it to get out of hand. And you have to admit, I mean, the fault falls upon the feet of those that was adults that has allowed for this to occur. They kept compromising. The salt lost its legitimacy. It lost its potency. The Christians lost sight of their righteous, holy, eternal God. That's the best way I can put it on any terms. On any terms. On any terms.
He was treated babies.
We've heard that the IDF has evacuated this town.
This is not going to be easy. A ground incursion will result in many deaths.
What went wrong here? Was this an intelligence failure? Was it a failure of the units?
Welcome to the fourth hour of Morning Joe, a live shot of...
It was a failure of the Christians not recognizing what we're truly up against pertaining to our adversary.
Says it is open to the possibility of freeing foreign hostages.
And now this adversary isn't just over in Israel. This adversary isn't just in Russia. This adversary has now lurked into our schools, our communities, our borders, our politics, our destroying our communities, destroying marriages, destroying people's lives.
And it's put out video to show that they're in good shape.
Israel is continuing this morning to pound the Gaza Strip on its mission to destroy Hamas, as hundreds of thousands of Israeli troops ring the area, ready for a ground invasion after Hamas killed 1,400 Israelis and took hostages, including women, the disabled, and children. Hamas continues to fire rockets deep into Israel, and in the north, from Lebanon, the powerful Hezbollah militia is firing on Israeli troops and positions along the border, threatening to open a second front. Hezbollah could even send its fighters across the border into Israel. And Iran this morning is making new threats of unspecified preemptive strikes if Israel continues its attacks into Gaza. Secretary Blinken said President Biden will soon arrive on arguably the most difficult and physically dangerous trip of his presidency.
The United States and Israel have agreed to develop a plan that will enable humanitarian aid from donor nations and multilateral organizations to reach civilians in Gaza.
The U.S. has deployed 2 aircraft carrier strike groups to the eastern Mediterranean, and 2,000 American troops are on standby. A clear message: the United States is ready to back Israel in a wider war. But there are signs of hope that diplomacy and deterrence may be working. Overnight, Hamas released a video of a hostage held in Gaza. A young woman who the group says is in good health. It's unclear when the video was taken. And in a potential major development, the spokesman for Hamas's military wing said the group is holding 200 hostages and that it is willing to release the foreigners among them, which include Americans, saying they were taken by accident and are not part of the fight with Israel. The spokesman said the foreigners will be released when field conditions are right. Iran says Hamas will free hostages if airstrikes stop. In Gaza, the humanitarian crisis is growing as hundreds of thousands follow Israel's order to move south and get out of the way of a possible ground assault. U.S. officials say discussions are underway for humanitarian supplies to enter Gaza and provide relief for the 2.3 million Palestinians cut off from food, electricity, and water.
My God. Richard, you have obviously spent your adult life in war zones. We are used to seeing your extraordinary reporting. We are not used to presidents of the United States going into war zones, and yet the president of the United States going to a war zone yet again. You were with him on that trip in Ukraine. Now he's coming to Israel. Talk about that.
So I wasn't with the president on the trip to Ukraine, but I was in Ukraine at the time, and people were surprised. This was a surprise visit. How could he be going to Kyiv? He took a train coming in from Poland, and this was as Kyiv and the rest of the country was under a Russian attack. And if you remember, U.S. officials made it very clear to Russia, do not strike. Do not even think about striking. And there was a degree of confidence that Vladimir Putin understood that. He understood the deterrence that it would not be in his interest to try and assassinate the president of the United States. Clearly, the United States is again signaling that message of deterrence. In a way, this trip by President Biden is a show of confidence that President Biden is going to come while these warships are in the area. Threats have certainly been conveyed to Iran, but very differently in this case. In Russia, you only had one actor. You had Vladimir Putin, who's been in power for decades, who himself is a president and knows the risks of attacking another president.
That's crazy. That right there just proves to me that they're on a suicide mission and they all want to die. I don't know if their lives is so miserable over there, or if it's just the curse that was placed upon that country and that area, that region, because they denied the Lord Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ's teachings. But one or the other, if they do something like that, it would be a suicide for that group of people that done something like that. Maybe they've reached a level that's acceptable to them. Maybe they want to go out in a blaze of glory. Who knows? I know it's out of hand. I know it needs prayer. I know it needs dedication. I know it no longer can be swept under the rug pertaining to evil emerging again and again and again. And I know that right now, just as the Bible talks about, that it would be as the noise of thunder, that we're starting to hear the thunder of these eruptions going on all over the planet that was already predicted to happen. Now it's going to be up to us to evaluate what's happening, try to prevent from it ever happening again, and try to do things the way that general was talking about this morning, of having an end game. It's one thing to go to war in a battle, and it's another thing towards what are you going to do after you get through winning the war. You can't just go with this stuff blindsided, because if you do, you're going to wind up making lots more mistakes. And that's something that the American government right now cannot afford to do. We have made too many mistakes in the past, and it's beginning to haunt the American people each and every day, and it's beginning to show up more and more and more. And how come we're going through what we're going through is because they did not go about this in the right, proper form. They took a left turn whenever they should have took a right, going back into the late 80s. That even to this day, the people around here that's known me all my life, that's about 7, 10, 15, 20 years older than me, still has yet to make any type of apology or any type of recompense. It's really sad. It's so sad. And how come we have been drawn into all this unnecessarily. Good luck to all of us. Want to say God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless Israel. God bless the Ukrainians. God bless God's people upon this planet that continues to get gnawed at, pawed at, rejected, keeps continually to get framed, keeps continuing to keep false accusations against them pertaining to the enemy that's working through various people. We just want to pray for all of God's children upon to the planet, that the meek will truly inherit the earth. Thank you for listening. God bless, and heaven help us all. Shalom.